Hey everyone, this is our virtual learning platform, and I'm excited to share some of the things that I've been thinking about in terms of virtual professional development. Virtual PD is something that we've been planning to do, and we've done to some extent, and we're just pushing forward with our thinking around virtual professional development. For our first session, we'll be discussing some ideas around Danielson's framework for teaching. And if you're familiar with Danielson's work, it's been around for a couple of years now. We've been using it to improve teacher practice and provide some quality feedback to teachers to improve their teaching and student outcomes. And the title of the lesson today is called Deconstructing Danielson. And what I wanted to do is go through each part of Danielson piece by piece so we can have a collaborative understanding of expectations from administration, and also to provide some support for teachers who may have questions about Danielson. So Danielson has it has 4 components. The first domain is planning and preparation. That'll be the lesson I will be discussing today. Next is classroom environment. Lesson 3 is instruction. And lesson 3 is going to be broken up into 3 parts, which is questioning and discussion, engagement, and assessment, because we want to make sure that everyone has the same understanding or has a better understanding of what's expected in the classroom around instruction, and then professional growth. Wanted to go through some of the skills and knowledge that will be gained through this professional development. Some of the skills that we want to learn is data analysis. What that means for us as teachers and educators is learning how to use student data to drive our instruction, to plan for curriculum shifts and changes, to know how to extend certain units and shorten other units based on student data and analyzing student data. Next is curricular research. And what we want to do is look at what's been working with similar populations in different states, different parts of the country, and just using what's been working already in other places in New York City and outside of New York City, LA, Detroit, Los Angeles, Atlanta, that serve a large population of Black and Brown students, as well as a large population of E&L students and special education students. Next, there's pedagogical strategies, and these are strategies that we want to improve upon and learn about and see what's effective for our students and learn more about it as we go on through the training. Then there's differentiating instruction, making sure that all of our students, regardless of their academic performance or profile, having access to the curriculum. Some of the research questions that we are trying to answer is, what is the relative impact of planning and preparation on student educational outcomes? And of course, there's a positive correlation that can be made, but we want to talk about how much it impacts students' learning, because we need to know that from a scientific standard, not just based on what I'm saying as a principal, but based on what's working for students. Next is assessments, and how do assessments support high quality planning? And next, how do we modify curricula based on student performance? And we're going to talk a lot about differentiation and modification, because we do serve a wide range of students, and we want to make sure that they all have access to the curriculum. Next, we will be thinking about some of the challenges or the problems that are faced. If you notice, the structure of this is in a typical research paper structure, where you have a question, problem statements, methods that we'll be looking at, data analysis, findings, implications for next steps, and also discussing some of the limitations of the work. So the first problem that a lot of us are facing, and that we know is a challenge in many of our schools in New York City, is low student enrollment. And that impacts the way that teachers plan and prepare for students. When the attendance is inconsistent or the classroom sizes vary at different times, planning is impacted in that way. And we have to find a way around that to still serve our students. Next, chronic Absenteeism has been a huge problem in New York City. The New York Post reports that it's at an all-time high at approximately 40%. I believe that percentage has gone down since this report was made, but it still is a challenge for many schools. Next is paperwork complaints from teachers. Teachers have historically talked about being burnt out because of the amount of administration or administrative work they need to complete. And lesson planning is a part of that struggle that some teachers have. So we want to look at how we can minimize the paperwork load, but still have effective curriculum and units and lessons for our students. And finally, as many of you know, many teachers are leaving the teaching force. It's reported that approximately 2,000 teachers have left the profession altogether in New York City. And throughout the United States, there's been reports of teachers leaving. And we want to think about how can we support teachers in being effective at their teaching so they can help students. Next is our theoretical frameworks. So in terms of the theoretical frameworks that we're looking at, one is the ecological systems theory that was developed by Yuri Grafenbrenner, and it offers a framework through which community psychologists examine individual relationships with communities in a wider society. Specifically for our students, we want to think about how students are at the center and how their families, their smaller communities, and the bigger society impacts their learning. And specifically for educators, how do we fit in those communities, and are we positively or negatively impacting their learning in that ecological system theory? Next, we want to look at intersectionality. Intersectionality is an analytical framework developed by Kimberly Crenshaw for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. So again, thinking about planning and preparation, thinking about ecological systems theory, we also have to have a conversation about race, class, gender, colorism, sexism, misogyny, and how all of those different aspects of a person's identity can negatively impact their expectations and how they perform in school. Specifically for teachers, we want to think about how seriously we take planning and preparation based on the population that we serve, the communities in which we work in, the language that the students speak. We want to think critically about that. I think it's human nature to say that we plan the exact same way for all students, but we know that's not humanly possible. We have underlying biases that we have to address. And next, which I think is the most important theoretical framework to consider, is servant leadership. Servant leadership is a leadership philosophy by Robert Greenleaf, built on the belief that the most effective leaders strive to serve others rather than improve power or take control. And when we think about planning and preparation, a servant leader, and leaders are teachers and teachers are leaders, a teacher who is focused on serving the children always puts the needs of the children first. And how do they learn? And how do they understand the curriculum? And what can they do to make sure that the school community is doing better, as opposed to teaching from a selfish perspective and what's comfortable for us. So we want to try and modify our teaching and be servants to the communities that we work in. So the first domain one, talks about planning and preparation. And here it says, domain one describes how the teacher designs, organizes, and creates instruction for his or her students. Planning and preparation allows the teacher to transform content from textbook information to activities and exercises, which make the content knowledge accessible to students. And we can stop right there. The key sentence for myself is the importance of teachers transforming content from textbook information to activities and exercises, which make the content knowledge accessible to students. To me, that's the magic of teaching, is making sure that the information that are in these textbooks are accessible to all students based on their diverse languages, learning abilities, race, gender, class, and everything else. And to me, that's just the most powerful part of teaching and learning, is being a part of the facilitation or facilitating that learning experience for students. Some of the components that are part of Domain 1 is demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy. And also, we're going to be looking at 1A and 1E. 1E, which states designing coherent instruction. Having knowledge of the content and pedagogy is something that comes over time for most folks, or it comes quickly for those of us who are invested and conducting research and learning more and more about their content as quickly as possible. I know that we have a lot of new teachers, not just in my school, but throughout the Department of Education. There's a bunch of new teachers. It's important that you grasp and you get a certain level of foundational knowledge of your content and basic pedagogical strategies that can help you. So, and next there's 1E, which states designing coherent instruction. Coherent meaning that the activities make sense based on the students that you have. They flow, they have a rhythm. It is designed in a way that helps the students to improve. The materials, the resources that are used are age and grade appropriate. The instructional groups are designed in a way that makes sense based on student data. Next, there's planning for intellectual engagement. Intellectual engagement means that the students are fully engrossed and engaged in the process of learning. And it means that you are always checking for understanding, you're having conversations with students, and everything that is planned to engage them intellectually. And intellectual engagement looks different for different folks. And we're going to talk about ways to assess that in other classes, but in your planning stage, the planning needs to be around how to get students engaged intellectually. And as we stated before, making sure that the planning is coherent. A couple of pieces of practical applications for you guys is one, assessments. Map Growth is an amazing tool to help students improve. It gives you feedback on what you're teaching and how the students are learning so you can make changes. Same thing with Lexia. It helps tremendously in terms of literacy and providing real data on your student performance. Next is Alex, which provides data on mathematical skills with your students. In terms of curriculum, there's a lot of curriculum out there that you want to look at and do some research on. Great website to look at is We Teach New York. Also, HMH Collections. They have a great virtual platform which has extensions for ENL and special education students. And also something we love to use for social studies is New Visions. So there's a lot of curriculum out there, and you want to take that curriculum coupled with the assessments that we just talked about, and you want to modify your curriculum based on the needs for your students. You don't want to take the curriculum and just use it for every student the exact same way, because it's not going to meet the needs of all your students. So modify your curriculum based on the assessment information and the pieces of curriculum that's out there. Next, it's important to develop a system and a structure for collecting and storing your curriculum, your units, your lessons. We like to use Google Classroom. We have, co-teachers that plan together on Google Drive. We use Google Docs as a living document to look at ways to revise and reconstruct some of the lessons that we have for our students. And the secret to me, in terms of really improving student production, is engaging students in the conversation. Have students give you some feedback on your teaching. It is difficult, and there will be a student who says something that you don't want to hear. But if we set our egos aside and we get the students to participate in that process, it empowers them. It helps them to see that they're a part of creating knowledge with you and learning together with you, as opposed to you depositing information into them. Next is teachers. Teachers have to work with one another and give each other feedback. It can be difficult because you are in a vulnerable space when you put yourself out there, but you want to develop healthy relationships with teachers who can help you along this journey. Then it's meeting with your administrator and listening to some of the feedback that you receive in your observations and taking it with a grain of salt. The truth is that 15 to 20 minutes in the classroom just gives us a snapshot into what's happening in the classroom, and you can just take that feedback and use it to help you as much as it helps you. And if you have questions, it's always good to challenge some stuff and ask some questions about the feedback that you're being given, because it's an open conversation. In terms of ratings, those of us who've been around long enough, we remember when it was unsatisfactory and satisfactory, and that didn't give enough room for transparent dialogue or feedback to get better. It was just a rating, and that was it. So we want to move away from that mindset. And we want to understand some of the consistent language you're going to see in every domain as you look at the Danielson framework. Ineffective speaks to major errors in terms of content and pedagogical practices. Major errors, meaning that the teacher doesn't understand the content, knows very little about teaching, and their approaches are sometimes traditional, or it's chalk and talk and very little interaction. What that means is that when an administrator goes into your classroom and the students are just silent and the person is just writing the entire time or talking the entire time and there's very little interaction, that might be a problem. Some might say, well, there's times that needs to happen, 100%. There's times it needs to happen, but it shouldn't happen too much in the classroom because students need to be a part of the learning process. Next, it's developing. The developing rating basically says that the person has a limited amount of understanding. They are familiar with certain concepts, but displays a lack of awareness. They have a limited amount of pedagogical practices that they're using in terms of engaging students. Their understanding of the content is at a very basic level, and that's pretty much it. So this is an example of that as a teacher who plans for lessons and they have a very simple understanding of the lesson, and that's what they teach the students. And when students want to explore more, or if they have further questions, the teacher isn't able to make those shifts at the time. Effective speaks to having an accurate amount of knowledge of the content and pedagogical practices. It's a solid knowledge base. They're familiar with a wide range of pedagogical practices and shifts that they need to make in the classroom. Critical attributes is when a teacher is able to teach a lesson and also make connections to prior lessons. They're able to make interdisciplinary connections between math and science, or social studies and English. And so that speaks to effective. Highly effective means that they have an extensive amount of knowledge of the content, an extensive amount of pedagogical shifts and transitions that they're able to make that's obvious in their teaching. So that's really important to know those differences in terms of the ratings that you have. Now, for myself, as a person who has done this for a very long time, I always leave the door open to have a conversation about ratings, always. I include other admins just to make sure that I'm not providing a rating that's off. I have no problem changing a rating based on new evidence that's found, because I understand that teachers are very sensitive about their ratings. Most teachers who listen to feedback, their ratings change and they grow and they improve, because the goal is to inspire teachers to be better, not to use this as a weapon to harm anyone, because that's oppressive, and you can't use oppressive strategies to liberate people, something that I believe. Finally, something that I wanted to leave you guys with is not reinventing the wheel. There's so much research and support and sample lessons and communities of teachers that are working together. There's no reason to try and go at this on your own. There's a wealth of research everywhere that you can use. So please do that. Don't try to figure everything out by yourself the first time around. So just to go over some of the key points that we discussed. 1, assessments, assessments, assessments. Use these assessments to drive your planning and your preparation. 2, do research. There is a ton load. There's a lot of curriculum being used throughout New York City, throughout the states, that are effective in helping our students to grow and change and improve academically. Take pieces of that research and use it, and select a curriculum that fits your student population. Next, once you get that curriculum, modify it based on your students' needs. Always be considerate of subgroups that are sometimes forgotten about. Make sure that you differentiate for E&L students, special education students. Next is collaboration, working with colleagues, getting input from students, working with your administrators. Sometimes you're in a school where you feel like you need support from someone else. For example, there's a teacher in a certain content area that doesn't feel like they can get the support that they need from their colleagues because it's a very specific area. So we send them out to different schools. We partner with other principals because it's about all of us helping each other out. Next is organizing your curriculum. What I've noticed a lot with teachers is they have great lessons, they have great resources, but each year I see some scrambling to find the resources because they haven't created a system to organize it so it can be easily accessible to them. I suggest using cloud systems, Google Docs, Google Classroom, Google Drive, and just having it available as a living document. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again. Take care.